name is Guido Preparata. Occupation is writer and research. And the books are Conjuring Hitler and The Ideology of Tyranny.
And in your book, Ideology of Tyranny, is it correct to say that postmodernism has prevented people from uniting against common oppression?
Yes, there was some kind of a divisive discourse that was introduced in academia and in the West, and then has had this huge boom in the United States, and it was just phenomenal for the establishment because it convinced everybody that we were different according to all sorts of distinctions in terms of race, sexual orientations, religions. And when you push this kind of divisive gospel to the limit, then you create such a state of mistrust as you can easily breed, especially in American academia. So much so that when the current events demand that an alliance be formed democratically from the grassroots to protest for basic issues of social justice, these kinds of wedges are very effective in preventing that. And I don't know what the situation is precisely in Britain, although I've noticed some of that too, but in America it's very strong. And it's now tangible even in Europe. There's a lot of that in France, and it's going to come down to the South.
Do you think that postmodernism manipulates dissent to suit the powerful?
Yes, I think so. Most of the people who chew that jargon are not aware of that. But if you look at the code of that language, that's what it does. And so those who favor the diffusion of that kind of language definitely have an agenda. Of that I have no doubt.
Who were the main people that began postmodernism?
The main guru of that in the States is Michel Foucault, which is this very, very strange scholar whose life has fascinated me. And they somehow took his fiction, delirious Gnostic romance, and turned it into such a thing that they could articulate with it racial or gender divisions in America and transform it into something altogether new to play this game of difference and opposition, diversity they call it. And he lent himself to the game. I mean, he died early on, but in the last phase of his career, he was at Berkeley, and he saw that. I mean, they imported him, and he watched this process as it went along. The story told in the book, however, is that all of this jargon, this imagery, this myth, is actually taken from this absolutely genial and very disturbing Frenchman who was not a professional academic. He was some kind of a sociologist who did pornography, or vice versa, a pornographer who did sociology, by the name of Georges Bataille, a really, really intriguing figure and who's occupied me for a while. And I could trace the pedigree of all these thoughts back to him. So that's what the book's about.
I was wondering if you could explain the link between the Nazis and the Bush family that you researched.
Well, there is no research there. I mean, even The Guardian published it. It came out, I think, in a congressional investigation, or the Senate, the American Senate, in Treating with the Enemy in 1942, and somehow the front of American interest was divided enough that something like this would percolate in a public investigation. And they found that Prescott Bush, father of George Sr., grandfather of George Jr., who was a steward of Herman Brown Brothers, the bank, was involved in channeling these funds to a Dutch subsidiary. The money was earmarked for the funding of the Nazis. So it's a fact. I mean, it's out there. I haven't dug that. I mean, I reported it, and everybody knows it. So the question is, well, what do you do with that kind of information?
How far do you think that the US and UK have gone with adopting neo-fascist policies akin to Nazi Germany?
One would have to define what Nazi policies are with respect to what. No, right now, I don't see the parallel. I may be mistaken. Right now, I guess they're figuring out what to do. I mean, everybody was expecting that a bubble would have been inflated to a year ago or so. It's not happening. There's voices that a new war is in the making, and so there's certainly something has got to give. It's not exactly how, but the situation is tense, and that's why, commercially speaking, things are not starting yet. That's what they do. This is the bubble that just exploded was the third one, starting from the neoliberal swerve under Volcker, 79, 1981. So we've had three. So people were saying, and I did too, well, okay, fourth is coming. Well, I was completely wrong. It hasn't happened yet. So we don't know. As far as policies, as I said, I don't know what is meant by neo-Nazi policies, and I don't see a parallel now between what is done by these governments and what Hitler did during the years of consensus. I don't see it. But I may be wrong.
So do you think that the events of World War II have shaped today's UK and US foreign policies at all?
Not so much. The US's policy is the same as the British Empire. It's exactly the same. After 9/11, where did they go? Afghanistan. It's like Kipling all over again. I see continuity. World War II was the Act 2 of eliminating the threat from Germany. Spectacular in a sinister way, but I mean the real important act was Act 1, was World War I. That's when it began, and World War II was the coup de grace. As far as the general politics, that's older. It's the same idea of maritime air power and control over the landmass.
Are you familiar with Paul Manning, his book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile? He says that money looted from Europe by the Nazis was used to set up hundreds of multinational companies with the aim of a neo-fascist type global domination with complicity by the US and UK.
Could be, I have no idea. To a certain extent, who cares if it's Nazi money or not? Monsanto or just agribusiness, the disasters that they are inflicting upon the earth. Who cares if they are actually funded by real Nazis or not? What matters is that they are disasters and that they should be fought in their own terms. But again, it could be, I don't know.
Coming back to the postmodernism, how relevant is it to influencing a kind of cultural relativism?
That's what it appears to be doing. There's things that you find this in those orientation courses you go to when you're in American universities. This is now, who is to say whether this is right? It's your white man's perspective and there is the black woman's perspective and all of that. Relativism seems to be the main dish, but it's just a deceiving entree. I mean, that's not what it's about. The ultimate goal, politically speaking, strategically speaking, of postmodernism is to generate mistrust and divisiveness.
But at the same time, oppression of black people and women does exist. So how do we balance out that with trying to overcome the divide and rule tactics that the powerful elite use?
So of course it exists. And of course, they're not arguing in a vacuum. This is why the argument is powerful and seducing. First of all, we should remind those who are most vehemently preaching this kind of gospel that the most amount of violence that the white man expends against other human beings, he has expended historically against other white males like himself. And this they tend to forget. It's not the question that the elite white male loves to exploit blacks and women. He exploits whoever he perceives as being weak. And the best way of getting rid of that barbarous mentality is some kind of general collective work that has to be done. Because if you look at the Western man, he's basically a mass man who knows nothing and thinks he knows everything, but he's in charge and he looks at and judges things according to two criteria. We Westerners judge others, although we claim we don't. That's how we are taught to think, that you're worth something if you manipulate well technology and business, and especially technology in the service of business and in the arts of war. So long as it's thinking through these terms and you just scratch the surface and you notice that most people do, even those who are most aggressive leftists sometimes are just like that. So long as this mindset prevails, there's no hope. So it's a deep work of soul searching that we need to do alongside one of serious historical investigation.
Are there any groups that are campaigning or investigating these issues? The idea of uniting against a common oppression and not allowing ourselves to be divided and ruled?
I'm sure they're out there. I mean, in all these years, I've not met many. I know there's lots of us out there who want to join and be together in doing this, but my answer to you is no. I've never seen them, but maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just lost in my own little cubicle. I have not perceived their presence anywhere. The sensation I had is we're just this pack of lone cats meowing for attention. Hopefully one day we'll be able to get the act together. I certainly hope so. I'm looking forward to seeing how your conference goes, and hopefully I'll get some kind of proceedings and feedback and stories, and I'll just be happy to read and wish you all the best and progress, and that you make more converts and make the group grow.
So the important thing really is that we need to start uniting and having a broad coalition of people that are demanding a more accountable democracy?
Yes, that. People who question the stories that have been told. The reason why I concern myself with these stories of the Nazis and so on, it's not because so much I'm interested. I am, but it's not my ultimate purpose of studying the Nazis per se. It's because they use these stories as militant myths to justify more wars and so on and so forth, according to this really crass type of narrative, good and bad, and obviously the German was Satan and we were God on the horse. And it's okay. If you want to tell that story and the world were at peace, fine. I mean, not really, but it's no. There's a propagandist myth that are blared out right before and yet another onslaught. And these onslaughts were not brought on by corporations, as a certain kind of less interpretation does. The corporations are auxiliaries. These are political maneuvers, always. Nobody knows what the toll is in Iraq. I'm not talking this time. The first one was a phony war, of that I'm convinced. They were dead, but this second time around, or certainly with the sanctions, nobody talks about that. And now, who knows what the toll is? And I don't know what the perception of that in the UK is, but I remember in the States, it was nobody could care less, and it goes on like this. Well, the psyche has been lost between this will to power, disguised as benevolence, and complete total indifference due to just the need to stay alive in a world that's ever more scary and things of that sort. So accounting, more democracy, questioning what is being told to us, and just get the government back. If we look at how this disparity between this plutocracy that has just formed itself in this last generation, it's just getting out of control. We need a big mass. I'm not talking about a mass revolt, but just a moment of indignation, just like in Spain, just, enough. Of course, I mean, how do you start from that? Well, starting by just taking some of the authority back where it belongs, simply that. And of course, uniting again, against these politics of diversity, which is very bad for people like us who are interested in getting the people back together and claiming more social justice.
What kind of organisational structure, if any, would facilitate us lone cats getting together? Because corporations unite people that can hate each other to a common goal of creating, getting richer. But how do we unite? Because I think there's a lot of people who are deeply dissatisfied with what's going on.
It's a great question. The answer is that I don't know. The only thing that we've been thinking about with other groups have been, one way of doing this would be, for example, of starting by first of all creating just to know one another, that we're part of a network. That's the way to begin, and interact and try to see each other as much as possible, create common programs. And there are ways, economic ways of linking up. I like a lot the ways of recreating communal banks, relaunching the economy at the communal level, and there are lots of ideas in the German world that I'm fascinated by, with the perishable money and things of that sort. So we have to start very small by keeping these connections going. But that's a great question, and it's a big challenge. Yes, corporations are united already. How do we create a charter of the people that has enough moral authority to resist these other groups? That's what we have to work on. I see these pilot projects, economic ones, at the community level, creating local markets and so on, bypassing sometimes banks when the money is not being lent. That's one way of doing it. And with initiatives like this and using the net in organizing travel and becoming one against these barriers, it's very fluffy, it's very general. But this is how we do it. It has to be done. We're creating it from scratch. And so it has to be done. We'll have to see as we go.
I think the independent media obviously needs to play its part. Would you agree? Because the mainstream media often seems to disempower people.
We should have our own newspapers. We need to have also representatives, because without that, it's not going to happen. And so maybe create new forces. Not the traditional parties. And some of these realities, I don't know about the UK, but in Europe they're emerging. In Italy, certainly we have one that's about ready to present itself next year, and it's very much feared. And it's counting on roughly 15 and 20% of the vote. It's a protest movement. I hear Germany has analogous protest movements that want to seek a legitimate entrance into the parliamentary dynamics, which is, of course, second best, third best. If we don't do that, I think we're playing ourselves out. So that's one way to do it. And also show that we're peaceful. It's a pacifist movement at all times. And so we're playing by the rules. So that's what you need to do.